All right, welcome back. Let's continue now as South Africa celebrates Youth Month. Young South Africans are disproportionately affected by the burden of youth unemployment. Youth unemployment is a complex crisis which finds its roots in a number of systemic roadblocks. It's not only that we have one of the highest youth unemployment rates in the world, reported by Stats SA in Q1 of 2024, sitting at 45.5% amongst people between the ages of 15 and 34 years of age. But at the sidelines, though, there are also other conversations happening regarding the state of the nation's youth. How are they feeling about South Africa and their future? So joining us for this discussion is the Executive Director of So We Vote, Utsile Nkadimeng, as well as virtually going to be joined in just a moment by the project leader at Youth Capital, a campaign advocating for policy change to solve unemployment. Crystal Duncan Williams. Of course, this is South Africa Observes National Youth Day, dedicated to the young SA youth in the country. A very good morning to you, the both of you. Let me start with you, Utsile. Thanks for joining us at this hour.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So we obviously saw Soweto Uprisings Day yesterday. Today, the country is having an extended holiday, but we can't ignore what has what has been undergone over the past 3 years, particularly in our 30-year democratic dispensation, as we look at the realities of the ground for the youth at large. You were also very busy yesterday at Constitutional Hill, marking and commemorating those events. I wonder if you could look at the 48th year that we're commemorating this event and what comes to mind, given the realities on the ground.
There is increasing apathy, unemployment and frustration amongst young people in South Africa. That is the unfortunate reality. 48 years after the Soweto Uprising, where we saw a lot of young leaders who are now leading the country, taking charge, speaking about the country and the South Africa that they wanted to live in, one of inherent prosperity, one where people, young people in particular, felt valued and where their future was brighter. 48 years onwards, a little bit skeptical about what young people in this country actually see for their future, because we are seeing levels of so much unemployment, poverty and degradation in the country that there's a prevailing sense of we don't know what's going on anymore. We feel so disconnected with what's happening in the country, not just from a leadership standpoint, but from a place of what our place in South Africa means in the future and also in the present, that I don't think a lot of young people viewed June 16 as a time of celebration.
No, absolutely. And given the issues that come to the fore for you, what do you think are some of those core issues 30 years into our democratic dispensation? Poverty, unemployment, inequality, are just, to name a few.
I think we have to start with unemployment. The number of young people who are unemployed in this country is shocking. And that is because, lots of lives are being held up by this unemployment. The fact that there are young people in this country who went to school, played by the rules, never broke any laws, went to university, matriculated, got their degree and everything, yet they aren't employed, or some of them who did pass in university but aren't graduates because NSFAS hasn't paid their fees. The fact that that's the reality in the country right now is breaking. It's breaking not just our society, it's breaking the state of what young people are able to do for South Africa. And so we have to start with unemployment. If we can address unemployment, we can begin to address the other issues, because it's holding up so many lives that by the time government or the private sector gets their act together and is able to actually address youth unemployment, we'll see an entire generation of people that would have been left behind, dubbed unemployable because they lack the experience or they lack the necessary time that they need practically on the job for them to be considered people that can contribute to the economy.
I'm thinking of Frantz Fanon's quote, and I actually don't want to mispronounce it or unquote it. Rather, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it. If we're looking at what the youth's mission is this time around, what would you say is that fight as we speak?
Justice. There's a lot of inequality, there's a lot of inequity, there's a lot of injustice in South Africa going on right now. You talk to a young person who maybe didn't vote in the election but was seriously considering it. There are two things that you immediately get struck by as you speak to them. And those are the two age-old questions. Was 1994 a revolution or was 1994 a reform? Now, a lot of young people are really asking themselves, what should we have gone with? Because there's a sort of disjuncture in society right now about how 1994 was, what 1994 meant to the country, and what it achieved for us as young people, what it achieved for us as South Africans. Have we addressed the underlying issues that are causing so much disparity in our society, that is continuing to keep families that have lived in Alexandra, Soweto for 70 years still there, that is keeping a family that has never known a university graduate still in that same position? how do we address these underlying injustices? Because if we can address that, I mean, we must think about it from a very practical standpoint.
Absolutely.
Justice and addressing the historical inequities of South Africa are the only way that this country can go forward. Otherwise, we will continue to have what we are seeing in South Africa today, and that is a society that is angry, frustrated, and unable to lift itself up to take South Africa into a much brighter future, which a lot of us young people really want, because we're not leaving the country. The majority of us are still here.
Well, this is the only home we know, so we can only build this home. It's actually going to be interesting to get your thoughts on what this new GNU also stands for and how effective you think it's going to be. Before we get there, let me welcome Crystal Duncan-Williams as well into the conversation. She is obviously project leader at Youth Capital. Crystal, good morning, and thank you for joining us as well on Morning Live at this hour.
Good morning, everyone.
I just had some opening remarks from Utsile, painting that picture 48 years later. Perhaps you could get your thoughts on, you know, what your reflections are regarding youth development, the state of South Africa for youth 48 years later.
I think that I would share, you know, many of the sentiments that are caught there at the end of the introduction. Young people, while on paper, have access to free education, equal access, supposedly on paper. We know that this is not the case, right? We know that the quality of education that young people receive at a Quintile 1 school is vastly different from a Quintile 5 school. We're not even talking about private schooling yet. We know that when young people exit, you know, only 1 in 2 grade 1s who start in grade 1 make it through to finish matric. And then they step into a post-school situation where, if they're lucky enough to find a place to study at, NSFAS doesn't pay the money on time, and they're forced to sleep in libraries and go hungry and eventually drop out because NSFAS is not supporting them in the way that they need. And the culture shock of university is often really traumatic for many young people coming from more rural areas. They often have no career guidance, and so end up studying things that are not going to allow them access into the labor market. And then again, for those who finish that qualification, the disillusionment of coming out of working really hard, making all those sacrifices despite all those challenges, to only sit unemployed. Because you've studied something that maybe the labor market doesn't value. You don't have the workplace skills. And then to be stuck and be unemployed for years and years and years, rejection upon rejection upon rejection. This is the reality that young people face. And in and amongst all of that, we've got things like the climate crisis, which I think young people are feeling deeply. We've got the corruption and the nepotism that young people are seeing within their communities at a very local level. In February and March, we traveled to 6 provinces and spoke to civil society, researchers, young people, some private sector representatives, and really that level of corruption and nepotism at the local level is something that weighs heavily on the minds of all South Africans. And so, in a nutshell, I think young people are at a really desperate place, in a really low place, and yet they continue to be optimistic and to try to show up in their communities in the way that they can with the resources that they have, whether that be, helping younger children to read, or helping others in matric to study for their exams. Young people are doing things. We just might not value the things that we're doing. And unfortunately, we as a society do not see the things that they are doing, and rather brush them off as lazy or entitled, which is not true for the majority of young South Africans.
Crystal, you also highlight 10 main challenges that the youth are facing. Perhaps you could speak to that as well. What also needs to be done to shift the needle on that crisis?
Our 10-point action plan at Youth Capital covers the areas of education. I mentioned the fact that many young people don't make it through the schooling system. Yes. We don't see young people as individuals. It's kind of a broad sweeping statement. Young people move schools, they move provinces, they've got to repeat grades, basic kind of administration that we're not getting right, because we don't check learners at the individual level very well. And then the kind of wraparound support that young people need, both psychosocial as well as academic. And then we talk about, I mentioned NSFAS. That financial support is so critical for young people. How can you expect young people to study if they don't have food on their tables? Once young people leave places of learning, they step into a place of nothing. The exorbitant costs of looking for work. We spoke to 10,000 young people at the end of last year, and Young people are spending in the region of 1,400 Rand a month just to look for work. Many of them never finding that work, despite having to borrow money, rely on grants to do that. Young people don't have the social networks to allow them access to opportunities. So they're really stuck in this place of nothingness in this transition phase. And then, if we look at the area of actually finding a work experience, we have public employment programs and things like the Basic Education Employment Initiative, which is kind of a light in the darkness of public employment programs and the Social Employment Fund as well, and the National Youth Service, where we've seen some money being put into the pockets of young people to provide services that the community needs. We need to now strengthen those partnerships in these communities with local businesses, so that when these short-term work opportunities end, they translate into a next step and not young people going back into that place of nothing that I just mentioned.
Yes, actually, I want to
small
pick up
and medium businesses. Yeah.
Yeah, please continue on that small and medium business. I just want to bring Utsile back in after that.
So, small and medium businesses don't have the support that they need to thrive. We often hear about the employment tax incentive, but from our research and others, we know that that's not really creating additional jobs in the labor market. And from Youth Capital's research, only 2 in 10 small businesses have accessed that employment tax incentive. So we're spending billions on something, as we do with many youth development programs, without really evaluating what is our return on our investment. We need to ask these critical questions as we enter a new political term, I think.
Utsile, on the back of what Crystal echoed now, the issue of interest amongst the youth in what's happening in South Africa also coming to the fore. We saw the youth playing a big role, unseating the ANC now at 40%, holding them accountable given the realities on the ground. Talk to that interest that you're seeing from the youth that they're this time round.
Young people are invested in South Africa. Like I said earlier, we're not leaving and we don't plan on leaving anytime soon. But that partly is because we see a future for this country that is different from what we're currently living in today. You look at youth movements, you look at the civil society space, you look at activist mobilization on the ground. Those are led and are spearheaded by young people for their community, for the country, and for the sake of our future. So that is an inherent interest in seeing this nation get better. You see political mobilizing. On campuses, it was not the IEC that was going to person asking, are you registered to vote? Will you be voting? It was other young people trying to mobilize youth and young people to participate in the election. When I say youth, I'm talking about people that are in that 18 to maybe 30 mark. And then when I say young, I'm talking 30 to maybe, let me not say the last number.
Choose your word.
But we see young people in those spaces, they're mobilizing. And,
absolutely.
One thing that really needs to be underscored is that now that we have young people mobilizing on the ground where the tire meets the tar, we need young people represented in seats of power at the executive table. When you talk about this election, the names such as Liam Jacobs, when you talk about a youth, when you talk about a young person, you think about Fasia Hassan, now at the National Assembly. These are young people that are representing youth interests, but they are a minority in a parliament that is supposed to represent over 60 million South Africans at the moment, the majority of whom are young people, and where you talk about the unemployed people in this country, the majority of whom are young. And so we need proper representation of young people there, because you can't have a generation that, albeit might have good intentions, but just is not connected to the lived experiences of young people. And so we need that on a national scale. And that's why you hear more and more young people saying, I can't vote for people who aren't even remotely attached to my age. I can maybe vote for a 30-year-old. I can maybe vote for someone in their late 20s, early 40s, pushing it. But someone that is in their 50s and 60s has a different lived reality of South Africa and frankly will address a different type of constituent that they can relate much better to.
And it's interesting because obviously we have to compete globally. It affects our competitiveness as a nation, given the labor force, given that labor market that, obviously, needs more entrants and more opportunities. Crystal, on the back of what Utsile echoed, just in terms of representation, having enough youth at the negotiating table as well, what more needs to be done on that front to ensure that representation occurs effectively?
I think we only need to reflect back on Sona of this year, where the president spoke about Nswalo, and I know that Twitter or X was hopping mad, to put it politely, at this fictional character that the president spoke about, which is not the reality for many South Africans. And the fact, that this is the picture that he chose to paint shows the depth of the disconnect between the president and other MPs and what it means to be a young person. And I absolutely agree that we need to get more young people into seats of power. We need to have some kind of mechanism where we are guiding young people towards that end point. But for those that are there, we're not going to get rid of all the old people, so to speak.
Exactly.
And it's why youth capitals come up with a conversation card game for Youth Month and beyond, called Thetha and ngeUnemployment. And we are going to be encouraging political parties and decision makers to play that game with young people, whether it's their nieces, their nephews. Revolution starts around the kitchen table. We need to be having these hard conversations. We need those, over the age of 40 to remember what it meant to be young, to remember what their hopes and dreams were and their aspirations were, and to really have conversations with young people to realize that the world in 2024 is very different from the world that they knew as 20-year-olds themselves. And the solutions that they think will work inevitably won't, because they are so far removed from the realities of the world today.
No, absolutely. So here's my question to both of you. How can leaders make up for the lost time and ensure that they do deliver on those service delivery issues and make up for the promises that they had been echoed perhaps 30 years now into our democratic dispensation? Let me start with Crystal, and then Utsila, I'm going to come back to you.
Sure. I think we need to look back at proper M&E. If we don't know where we've gone wrong in the past, how can we learn from those mistakes and move forward? I think there's a lack of, at the very high level, a deep budgetary review. Budgets are just based on spend and kind of historically how budgets have been spent. We need a deep evaluation of service delivery within specific municipalities so that, the new hands understand what the old hands have done and can either build on what is working or chuck out what is not working. If we don't know that, we're basically going in blind, and we are very likely going to make the same mistakes again. And so I think we need to start there and to own the fact that we've been really bad with transparency in terms of reporting down to the local level, and we need to fix that as a point of urgency.
What's there for you on the back of that? Also, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is that there's more and more young people awakening to what's happening in the country. And you said that what can leaders do in response, Young people will tell you that they have a sense that leaders have run out of vision, they've run out of direction, they've run out of a way to get South Africa out of this mess. And when that happens, they need to be run out of power. And that was a huge message we're getting from young people in this election. I mean, at So We Vote, we literally have no money, but we're just a bunch of first years that are trying to mobilize more young people to get involved. And so when we're engaging with them, they're saying to us, the thing that gives them hope is that they're seeing organizations like Youth Capital, organizations like So We Vote. They're seeing individual young people waking up, working in their community, doing things that are making this nation just a little bit better. Because millions of people waking up in South Africa, majority of them young, who are apathetic, who feel that nothing can change. They need someone to show up and make something good happen. And when people like Youth Capital, when we at So We Vote get up and we do things, when more young people get up and do things, it makes people feel that South Africa is a much brighter and much better future. So, summarize, leaders need to get out of the way and let a lot more young people enter the space and take South Africa to where our generation needs it to get. And secondly, people just need to show up and make good things happen.
So we can't ignore the strides that have been taken, but obviously there are still more questions than answers at this point. And thank you to the both of you for joining us at this hour and for weighing in, really speaking to the reality on the ground and really echoing what your hopes are for the future as we navigate the next 30 years beyond our 30 years of democracy already.